Man vs. Machine is getting a major update soon for the first time in about 10 years. This is pretty exciting news. At the very least, it's adding new maps, and if we're lucky, it'll add new Australians too. And these are all great additions to MvM that I would love to see. Lord knows we need an alternative to two cities that's actually worth playing. But they unfortunately don't solve one of the biggest problems that I currently have with the mode. Some weapons and playstyles are significantly worse than the actually good ones to the point where there is no reason to ever use them. And it's not even just that they're outclassed, they actively offer you nothing that you want when playing the game. So while some people may say that problem doesn't really need solving because after all, MvM is decidedly a side mode to proper multiplayer TF2, I personally disagree. I think that there's a major feature of the game mode that should come to the rescue here but currently goes horribly underutilized, the upgrade system. It's entirely possible to just give bad weapons cool new upgrades and watch them immediately start to shine, which gave me an idea for a fun design challenge regarding MvM. Find the worst classes and weapons the mode has to offer and try to turn them into something great with nothing but the upgrade station, ideally in a way that makes sense with the design of the weapon. And overall, even if some of these may not be perfect in practice, I do think that I've come up with a lot of interesting upgrades that would make the game mode a lot more fun. So while I work on other projects, here are my ideas for upgrades that could save MvM's worst weapons. But first, this video is sponsored by Opera GX. Opera GX is a web browser with a lot of useful features, but most importantly, it isn't boring. Thanks to its newly debuted feature, GX Mods, you can customize the look of your browser to make it as interesting as you can possibly want. Want to make your browser look like it's running on a CRT? Sure. All it takes is a single click. Want to know how many system resources you're using? Well, you could just open Task Manager and check the boring way, or you could install this mod that adds a bunch of fish that dynamically change based on your resource usage. You can also customize stuff like background music, keyboard sounds, and startup splash screens, either by finding existing mods or making them yourself. And if you want to see the mods you've downloaded, you can view them all on this handy control panel, which lets you toggle on and off whatever individual features you want. Speaking of system resources, Opera GX also has the GX control panel that lets you manually choose how much the browser itself is allowed to use, letting you really squeeze performance out of your PC. And finally, if you want to, you can access ChatGPT through the sidebar pretty easily, letting you ask some no doubt wise and life-changing questions to it. If you're interested in trying Opera GX, you can check out the link in the description. It's completely free, so there's no risk in giving it a go. Before I begin, I do want to make a very important note just so we're on the same page with why I'm making certain changes. Nearly all of my upgrade ideas are effectively direct buffs to the classes they're on, but as it stands, MvM is already easy enough that I don't think buffing more things is really necessary. So ideally, if these upgrades got added to TF2, they would be done alongside of difficulty changes to the game overall in some way, shape, or form. On top of fixing game-breaking bugs like idle rock, the best one that I can think of is reverting the refund system to only give you one refund permission instead of having infinite of them. Because yeah, overall, letting you refund infinite times did way more to affect the balance of MvM than anything I'm going to suggest here. But anyway, just note that yes, I am aware that if we did absolutely nothing else, there's a good chance these upgrades would make the game too easy, which is definitely not what I'm looking to do. I just want to make the bad weapons usable while also adding fun new ways to play each class. So before we get into the new upgrades, there is one pretty big change to MvM's weapon system that I think should be added across the board. A lot of damaging secondaries like shotguns, pistols, and SMGs can't get damage upgrades for some reason, while your primary weapons can. I really don't know why this is the case. I don't think letting you upgrade damage on your pistol is going to break the game, and it does remove a lot of interesting ways to potentially play the class. So I say no more. The first change that I'm going to make is allowing every single weapon that's focus is dealing damage to actually get the damage upgrade so it can play on equal terms with the primaries. Well, most of them anyway. I don't think weapons like the gas passer need to do even more damage than they already do. But yeah, I really do think that if a lot of currently bad weapons had access to the most basic upgrade in the entire game, they would actually be pretty solid. Anyway, let's start the new upgrades with the weapons that are shared across a couple different kits, because on average these tend to be a lot more lacking than their class-locked side grades. The shotguns are a fantastic example of this, existing as backup easy to land damage in a game mode where you can make your primary reload basically instantly and every single enemy moves in a straight line. The niche they fill doesn't really exist in MvM, and there isn't really much reason to throw on a shotgun over literally anything else in the same slot. But on top of that, the arguably bigger problem is that you're missing out on a lot of potential utility by running a shotgun over stuff like the banners or gas passer. Most classes' power is concentrated into their primary weapons, so having some kind of support option as your secondary is usually the route you want to go. So I think we should give shotguns a new upgrade that does just that. What I'm proposing is called Shotgun Specialist. With this upgrade, every time you get a kill with your shotgun, you get 2 seconds of guaranteed mini crits on all of your weapons for each tick, letting shotguns contribute toward your main DPS a lot more effectively. And additionally, every kill you get reloads every weapon in your loadout instantly, including the shotgun itself. This converts the shotgun from a nothing weapon into an easy way to keep your primary topped off and damage boosted as long as as you have enough smaller robots you can feed it. And since the bonuses also work on itself, this could potentially even turn shotguns into a more specialized but still effective primary source of damage, exactly as the name would imply. Obviously, this wouldn't synergize perfectly with every shotgun unlock, but the ones that get the least would also need it the least, for example, the Widowmaker and Rescue Ranger. And well, yeah, it would be very powerful when used optimally. I do think it would be pretty comparable to the other secondaries, since again, you're trading team support for more general damage. Overall, this seems like it'd be an easy way to make shotguns actually effective on the classes they're on, while also being a ton of fun to use. Another weapon type with the same problems as the shotguns are the pistols, and I guess also the stock SMG and revolver. You don't really need a backup finish-off weapon when Scout prefers debuffing over damage, the Wrangler directly benefits the thing you should be upgrading anyway, and the Latranger filling your cloak meter is way too good to pass up. The SMG at least lets you deal with, like, spies sometimes, but even that role is vastly overshadowed by stuff like the Girardi and Cleaner's Carbine. So let's give all three pistols and the stock SMG and revolver the new upgrade minus 40% speed on hit, which can stack twice for an 80% total speed loss. Now that sounds like a huge speed reduction considering the jars only slow by 35%, but the catch here is that the slowdown is incredibly brief, only lasting for 0.8 seconds per shot. This makes it more of a stun or pseudo knockback effect than a proper slowdown. Instead of being able to chuck it at a group of enemies and forget, you have to actively focus fire whatever robot you want to stall. The idea here is that it gives you options. You can choose to glue a single enemy in place by focus firing them, or you can get projectile penetration and repeatedly stagger larger groups by firing into the crowd. This makes pistols a proper side grade to both the Mad Milk and the Wrangler. They're better at stalling and can also deal damage while they do it, but they don't apply the milk effect or give your sentry a powerful shield. And while I'll get to the mini spy changes later, this would be a good option to hold giants in place while you move in to stab them. Now speaking of giants, minus 80% speed on them would obviously be insane, and if left as is would basically render them as non-threats. So in addition to each tick only slowing giants by 30% instead, I do want to add an extra stat to make the encounter with giants a lot more interesting. Giants will always prioritize targeting whatever player hit them with this upgrade. This adds an extra layer of strategy, since on top of good players being able to keep fire off of their team while they focus on dodging, engineers can keep their sentry alive for much longer by forcing the giant to focus on them. So yeah, overall, even if we have to tweak the numbers a bit, I do think this is a really cool way to make the automatic secondaries relevant. A set of weapons that's shared by technicality are the Dr. Gordbort weapons, or the shiny metal energy weapons that as a rule tend to suck ass. The only one of these considered actually good is the Phlogistinator, with I guess the Cow Mangler in third degree being okayish in certain situations. The rest have incredibly niche uses and can sometimes be good if you dump a bunch of crit canteens into them, but really don't do too much to help your gameplay. So I think the best way to offset that is by giving this class of weapons its own unique utility upgrade that makes them more universally viable. For this, I've created what I'll call Signal Jammer. For 450 credits, you can make any bot you damage completely unaffected by friendly buffs. This would disable stuff like banners, bomb buffs, and even Uber charges, which is incredibly powerful but does have some pretty high demand. You don't actually prevent the Uber medics from popping, you just temporarily make it so whatever they're healing is still vulnerable to damage. And bots that are already Ubered aren't taking damage and thus wouldn't have their signals jammed. It wouldn't completely invalidate them, but this would be a great solution to getting stuck on bad teams who just can't help but pop every single Uber medic they ever see. Fire a Bison shot or hit the main guy with a third degree, and now your team's boot camp looking ass heavy isn't much of a liability anymore. However, as big of a help as this is for stuff like the Righteous Bison, the Man Melter and the Pomson I don't think would benefit from this a ton. So on top of Signal Jammer, I think we should let those two weapons inherit the projectile penetration upgrade. Shotguns already get this, but the literal laser beams don't for some reason. This not only makes sense, but it also helps them jam signals a lot more effectively. But yeah, I think some kind of buff mitigation would be a very useful thing to have in MvM. And to address the concern that I'm sure a lot of experienced MvM players would have, yes, this would be a very powerful upgrade in the right circumstances. But again, I will remind you that ideally this would be added alongside other difficulty tweaks to the game mode as a whole, in which case something to mitigate bad teammates would definitely be appreciated. And last up for the shared weapon concepts, let's take a look at the bleed theme weapons, because right now they're definitely a bit lacking. 60 damage over 8 seconds is, well, I mean, it's not nothing, but most robots either have several thousand health or die so quickly there's no point in bothering. So sure, I wouldn't mind if bleed got buffed. Sorry, had something in my throat there. The upgrade I'm proposing would affect the native bleed weapons like the Flying Guillotine, Rap Assassin, Boston Basher, Southern Hospitality, and Tribal Shiv. And on top of outright replacing the bleed upgrade for the Huntsman, because what the hell was this even meant to do, it would also apply to a couple stock melee weapons like the Fire Axe and Bonesaw to help those weapons not be completely useless. I'll call this one Oil Leak, and its purpose is to upgrade the bleeding status effect into a legitimate debuff that your team can benefit from. It's basically a way to make powerful robots a bit less threatening while also taking more damage damage in a way that stacks with stuff like crits and banners. While bleeding, enemies will both fire their weapon 40% slower and also turn to face their target 40% slower too, making stuff like dodging and circle strafing a lot more effective. And on top of that, bleeding robots will also receive 20% more damage from all sources, which again stacks with stuff like crits and Girardi. That is obviously very powerful, so I think it's also fair that it comes with a hefty price tag of 500 bones, the same as the Sandman's Mark for Death upgrade. Even with the cost though, I do think this would put the bleed weapons on par with the other debuffers, making Scout's loadout choice especially much more interesting. But hold on, there is one more thing this upgrade needs to be perfect. There, now it's art. The reason that I'm doing this actually isn't just for the meme. Okay, well, it's like 75% for the meme, but Spy having a revolver that can inflict the oil leak debuff would actually be really good for him. One of the hardest parts about playing Spy in MvM is that robots turn so quickly, circle strafing them is a legitimate challenge a lot of the time. And frankly, out of all of the possible ways that I could give this upgrade to Spy, there is no way in hell I'm passing up on the most perfect opportunity I've ever seen to make Le Executor real. So yeah, on top of making bleed really good for every class that it's on,
it's all upsides in Enforcer. Town buffed.
So, moving on to class-specific upgrades, we will start with Scout. Overall, Scout is in a pretty good position in MvM with a very solidified supportive role to his name. Not every map needs a Scout for money collection, but just having one practically guarantees a steady income even if he never uses a single item in his loadout. However, that doesn't mean that he shouldn't use his items to make the most of his gameplay, and while they are pretty solid for the most part, they're definitely very centralized on a select few, and I think the rest could really stand to be made into something more interesting. For instance, two weapons that really should be good but just aren't are the soda cans. They're not unusable per se, but neither of them really offer anything worth dedicating an entire weapon slot to, especially compared to the Mad Milk. The bonk has niche uses for body blocking giants and collecting money being guarded by robots, but it's not really the most consistent at doing either of those things. And while mini crits on command sounds amazing, Scout's entire job is already marking enemies for death, and it's not like the Criticola is making you mini crit those enemies even harder. So let's introduce some upgrades that make the soda cans worthwhile. The first upgrade I'll give to both of them is a 25% faster drinking speed that stacks up to 3 ticks. At max, this makes the drinking animation basically instant. This means you can pop a soda can much more reactively to the situation you're in, and you have much better advantage of any cooldown upgrades you bought alongside it. This is still a pretty minor convenience in the grand scheme of things though, so I think a lower cost of 100 credits per tick is perfectly fine here. And hell, we'll also give this to the buffalo steak sandwich because that's another item that could make good use of it too. The main upgrades I want to give to each soda can though are completely unique and designed to make them stand out more in their respective roles. As mentioned, the bonk is already decent at body blocking and collecting money unimpeded, but both use cases share the same fatal flaw. Even if you can't take any damage, you are incredibly susceptible to knockback. If there are sentries, heavies, explosive classes, really anything that would justify using the bonk to deal with in the first place, you end up spending a lot of your time simulating a NASA launch instead of completing your one objective. So I propose we give the bonk the simple but highly effective knockback immunity upgrade for 400 credits even. I mean, it just makes sense. It lets the bonk do its job and puts it a lot more on par with stuff like the Mad Milk. In lieu of being able to heal your entire team and slow robots, you can get money for free and have 8 seconds of powerful body blocking. Pretty easy upgrade with a good variety of use cases. The Criticola is a bit harder to create upgrades for though, since again, Scout already has several ways of guaranteeing mini crits that also benefit your entire team instead of just you. That said, all of the ways that Scout can currently mark enemies are in his melee slot. Even if it does have some conceptual overlap, I honestly wouldn't mind a secondary that could do it too, since it'd make loadout building a lot more flexible. So I'll propose the mark enemies for death on hit upgrade, where drinking the Criticola also marks the enemies you shoot for a short time. This would have the incredibly powerful ability to mark entire groups of enemies for death at the same time, but like the slowdown upgrade, if you wanted to keep a debuff up on a single target, you would have to focus fire them. So yeah, it's not exactly a unique effect in his kit, and it does come with the downside of you being marked for death too, but it would free up your melee slot if you wanted to run something that isn't the Fan of War, which in my opinion is the sort of thing that should be encouraged in MvM. Now the one fatal flaw to that problem that you may be thinking is what other melees are even worth running? And to that I say, good point, let's make some. Right now the Fan of War is the pretty clear winner, with the Sandman trailing close behind, and hopefully the Boston Basher and Rap Assassin also keeping up with the new oil leak upgrade. The rest of them though could really use something to keep pace, and I think the best way to do that is through a simple but versatile stat that helps Scout do his job all around. So for the Stock Bat and Atomizer, I will propose the +1 midair jump on wearer upgrade. Every tick of this you have gives you an extra double jump, no need to even have your bat out. This gives Scout a minor boost to basically everything he wants to be doing. You get better combat, better evasion, better money collecting, and a lot more control over your air movement than what jump height itself offers. I don't think this would be meta defining, but it would be the best choice for Scouts entirely focused on getting the money at least. For the candy cane, Arcane, the obvious solution is the Milk on Hit upgrade. It's thematic, already being the healing melee, and it once again gives you a lot more flexibility when building your loadout while keeping all of the boxes checked. Again, especially for Scout, who's a very support-focused class, I think there should be a lot of ways to do the things he needs to do. And finally, for the Son on a Stick, I think it would be cool if you had an ability that no other melee weapon did and that you could directly upgrade the damage. Damage buffs are something melees weirdly tend to avoid, with the only ones that can get them being the swords if you're already running a shield. I'm not entirely sure why this is the case. Pyro doing double fire axe damage doesn't exactly threaten the integrity of MvM, but at the very least, I do think that some damage-focused melees should break that precedent, and the Son on a Stick has enough conditional requirements to be a good pick for it. At max damage ticks, you're doing around 150 damage per crit. So max out firing speed and pair this with the Pyro, and you have a more situational but cheaper way of taking down giants. Fits neatly within Scout's role while not reinventing the wheel. Overall, a solid upgrade choice in my opinion. Next up is Soldier, who also has quite a few bummer items that never get to see the light of day. Not all of these are completely horrible, but I really can't fathom many arguments as to why you'd ever use them over directly better options. Take, for example, the Black Box. It's not bad per se, it's still a rocket launcher at the end of the day, but starting with one fewer rocket really hurts at basically every stage of Soldier's gameplay, and if you really want self-healing, you can buy it on any rocket launcher you want for $200. Especially at max upgrades, the difference between 100 health on kill and 100 health on kill plus 20 health on hit is completely negligible. With that in mind though, what I do think would be interesting is if the Black Box could uniquely benefit from overkill amounts of self-healing by letting it overheal you past your max health. With this upgrade, which I'll call Self-Healing Specialist to fit the other specialist upgrades already in the mode, any self-healing you get from any one of your weapons converts into increasing amounts of overheal with each tick. This obviously works with the box's native lifesteal, but it would also apply to the Heal on Kill upgrade, lifesteal from the Conqueror, and health from enemies covered in Mad Milk. Basically, it turns Soldier into a damage sponge with incredible sustain in lieu of outright damage, which should make for a very fun tank playstyle if nothing else. The other two normal rocket launchers that don't get much use are the Liberty Launcher and Direct Hit. The problem with the former is obvious. Damage is king in MvM, so the weapon that loses a quarter of it is naturally going to suck. The Direct Hit being bad though has always seemed really weird to me, since you'd think the increased damage would make it amazing at killing giants. However, the Direct Hit and many other weapons are racked with a major problem, and that is that MvM hates fun. More specifically, if an unlock increases a stat that you can also increase with upgrades, the game treats it as already having a point in that upgrade instead of starting at 0. So for example, in the Direct Hit's case, you don't get the 25% damage bonus and then the ability to upgrade damage 4 more times. You can only buy 3 total damage upgrades, which means its max potential is actually worse than the stock rocket launcher considering the negative stats don't get more upgrades to compensate. Let's be real, this is dumb and really should not be the case. So let's just go ahead and remove those weird caps for every case like this in the game. Maybe with exceptions for the Scottish Resistance's firing speed and the Vaccinator's Uber rate, since those could actually be problems. And wow, just like that, the Direct Hit is actually halfway decent. The Liberty Launcher is unfortunately not so lucky though, so that one will need something new. And even though it might not be very good, something that I've always thought would be really fun to play around with would be giving it the projectile penetration upgrade. This would offset each rocket's lower damage by potentially letting them explode several times each, which would make it incredible at group damage. Now, because I could see this becoming very powerful, we would probably have to opt for the Heavy's flavor of projectile penetration, where each tick gives you a single additional target you can penetrate. And honestly, hell, if the Direct Hit is still lacking even with the extra damage, I honestly wouldn't be opposed to giving that one projectile penetration too. This one definitely centers around making something fun over something conventionally good, but on a class like Soldier who already has all of his bases covered with stock, I really don't think that's a problem. So even with most of Soldier's secondaries being covered through the multi-class changes, there is still a gaping hole in his kit that's yet to be addressed. Trollger. Calling Trollger bad in MvM would really be an understatement, because even at max potential, he is easily one of the worst playstyles in the entire mode. You effectively sacrifice your secondary and melee slots for the chance to do one singular non-damage boosted crit with your melee. That really does not cut it when you're fighting either a ton of robots or one robot with a ton of health, which is basically the entirety of MvM. So because I really want Trollger to be useful, I think it's time we add some upgrades to him to really help him find their place in the meta. Let's start with the absolute worst one out of all of them, the Rocket Jumper. I intentionally didn't cover this in the main Soldier section because I really don't know what you're meant to do outside of Trollger with this thing. It's a launcher that deals 0 damage to anything. What positive things can I even say about it? I guess if you upgrade Rocket Specialist, you can do this, which is pretty funny, but beyond trolling something that isn't even sentient, I can't really think of any practical uses for this thing. But as bad as it is, I think you can actually completely fix the Rocket Jumper with only a single upgrade. I'll call this one Explosive Melee Crits, which works probably exactly like you'd expect it to. Critical hits with any one of your melees would now transfer the damage to any nearby robot, similar to Explosive Headshot. The obvious pairing is with the Market Gardener being the only melee to give you crits on command. But even weapons that get random crits like the Shovel and Equalizer would now be really good at dealing with large groups of robots. Now you may be wondering why I put this on the Rocket Jumper instead of the Market Gardener itself, and the main reason reasons are that 1, it'd be incredibly powerful, so having to give up your main means of damage would be a fair trade-off. But 2, I honestly think it would be fine to let this work with every melee in Soldier's kit rather than just being restricted to proper Trolldier. MvM doesn't really have any melee classes outside of Demo Knight, and I think Soldier's a good alternative to it. Overall, I think putting explosive melee crit on the Rocket Jumper would work out nicely. However, I am not done with Trolldier upgrades just yet. I think the Market Gardener should get a unique upgrade of its own to really help it stand out from the WM1 shovel playstyle I imagine would arise from this. After all, you realistically only get a single critical hit from each rocket jump, so I think it's fair to let that one crit do boatloads of damage considering how skill-based it is. The upgrade for this, creatively named plus 100% damage while blast jumping, does exactly what it says. It makes your Market Gardens hit like a truck. At max upgrades, you're dealing 975 damage on a successful garden, pretty comparable to a fully charged sniper headshot with the same upgrades. Which, yes, if you haven't noticed, I am using sniper as a template for what I think Trolldier should be, but ultimately I think it makes the most sense. They fill similar roles in PvP, both being pick classes. Why reinvent the wheel when Valve already got it right with sniper? I really do think this version of Trolldier would be a ton of fun though. Being able to fly in toward a large group of enemies, Market Garden the center one, and have the entire group collapse instantly would be awesome. But wait, we're not quite done yet because Soldier also has a couple secondary choices. And for some reason, not a single one can be upgraded at all. What the hell is this? Well, let's start with the Man-Treads. The Man-Treads probably could get away without any new upgrades at all, just letting it benefit from explosive melee crits would be enough to make him amazing. That said, I do think there's an easy upgrade to give both it and the gunboats, and that's minus 25% fall damage. It's a pretty minor buff in the grand scheme of things, but it does at least contribute toward the weapon theme and would be a nice quality of life upgrade if you've got the extra credits. It would reduce the amount of healing you have to find after going for repeated gardens. Overall, I think that's all the Man-Treads really need. The gunboats are a bit trickier though, considering there's no reason to use them with the new Trolldier stuff, so I also want to give those the +2 ammo regen upgrade. This is meant to be used with actual rocket launchers, giving Soldier a few more options if your team's engineer either sucks or doesn't exist at all. Instead of being forced to sacrifice your primary for the Cow Mangler, you could now choose to sacrifice your secondary and stick to the launcher of your choice. If you haven't noticed, I am a big fan of upgrades that don't give the class anything outright new, but still allow for more loadout variety by porting utility into a different slot. It's an easy way to make sure that what I'm adding doesn't break the game at least. Anyway, last but not least is the base jumper, which would normally need a lot of help, but would probably be absolutely bonkers when paired with a maxed out Market Gardener. The slow fall effect lets you hit multiple gardens before hitting the ground, way more so if you max out the firing speed too. The one thing that I do want to give it though is ability to redeploy while in flight, which effectively just undoes the Jungle Inferno nerf and lets you deploy the parachute again before landing. The reason that it got nerfed is because it's annoying to use against human players, but there's no reason we can't have it here. Or at least if the robots start complaining about it, we suddenly have way bigger problems anyway, so the base jumper nerf doesn't matter as much. Anyway, that was a lot for Scout and Soldier, but they were the two big classes because they have the most bad weapons by far. From here on out, it'll go pretty quick. Which I will say, even though Pyro has the same amount of weapons as Scout, they did a good job overall at making him useful. Most flamethrowers have a solid niche, flare guns do amazing early game damage thanks to their low upgrade price, and the gas passer is not bad in MvM, and most of his other secondaries like the shotguns and man melter were taken care of with the multi-class upgrades. Overall, all is well. But while we're at it, I do want to clean up the few remaining stinkers, starting with the Degreaser. Despite being my favorite primary in PvP, weapon switch speed is unfortunately not very valuable in a game this predictable and dense with enemies. Ultimately, the Degreaser just isn't the flamethrower built around dealing the high damage you need to deal in MvM, but there is thankfully another direction that I think it can naturally be taken, and that is to make it the Air Blast flamethrower. Well, kind of anyway. We do have to be a bit careful with this because the knockback part of Air Blast would actually ruin the entire game mode if you could upgrade it too much, so we probably don't want to do that. But the Reflect part of Air Blast actually is something we can make a solid upgrade around. So here is Reflect Specialist, the Degreaser exclusive that turns every reflected projectile into crits while also giving them 50% more damage and explosion radius. On top of that, to offset the Degreaser's more expensive Air Blast cost, every time you reflect a projectile, you get refunded for the ammo you spent on the Air Blast. This turns the Degreaser into a very high skill but cool way to counter explosive spam. If there's a large amount of projectiles on the field, you now have a way to turn that directly into your damage instead. Overall, even if I don't think it would make the Degreaser on par with the rest of the other flamethrowers in terms of general power, I do think this sort of upgrade would make it really fun to use. At the very least, it would help it stand out in a way that I do think would be very powerful under the right circumstances. Pyro's secondaries are again overall in a pretty good state. Even the worst of them, the Thermal Thruster, actually has some pretty interesting stuff going on with it, and overall I think is pretty underexplored in MvM. Melees though, not even close. You use the Power Jack if you exist, and if you're exceptionally bored, I guess you can slap out the 3rd degree and buy crit canteens or something. There is really no reason to touch anything else ever. My solution to that then is to give most of Pyro's melees the same universal upgrade that helps you out regardless of your loadout. Plus 25% ammo on kill. It's just heal on kill for ammo. It gives the class that runs out of ammo most in MvM an easy way to keep himself topped off by going for melee kills. I've always hated how over-reliant MvM's ammo economy is on engineers to dispenser because you're not necessarily guaranteed to have that in every lobby. So sure, some kind of upgrade to help Pyro out specifically would be nice here. The only melees that wouldn't get this would be the power jack to provide some kind of actual trade-off for not using the power jack, and the third degree because on top of already being a direct upgrade of the fire axe, I think with signal jammer it would be in a fine enough state. However, I'm not done with the melee upgrades yet, so let's talk about the extinguisher. I'm frankly shocked that Pyro's most iconic melee doesn't have its own playstyle, though I guess with the Market Gardener being equally forgotten, the precedent is unfortunately there. Still though, let's fix that and give the extinguisher the damage versus burning enemies upgrade. For the most part, this just does what's on the tin. Your extinguish hits now do up to double damage each. However, if you're wondering why not just give this thing a flat damage upgrade like the sun on a stick, that's because I want to add an additional hidden effect. The first tick of this you buy also makes it so the extinguisher doesn't extinguish enemies on hit. This would let you wail on giants without having to reapply flames every time you smack him, which makes firing speed an actually useful upgrade. In my opinion, this is a lot closer to what the extinguisher should be in MvM, a solid giant buster that could also chain kills on weaker enemies for a continuous speed boost. But while we're at it, there is one more under the hood issue with the extinguisher that I would really like to see fixed too, and that's letting the burn damage and burn time upgrades properly factor into how much damage you deal per hit. It's supposed to be equal to the damage your afterburn would have dealt if it completely burnt out, plus a 35% damage bonus or so from the mini crit. Even though the burn time and burn duration upgrades technically make this number a lot higher, the extinguisher isn't programmed to scale from those, and honestly I really think that it should. On top of just making basic sense, it'd be a super cool synergy and would actually give those upgrades a proper use beyond taking up UI space. So yeah, even separated from the upgrades that I've proposed, I would love to see this as an actual feature in MvM. Next up is Demoman, who really doesn't have that many bad weapons to his name. The only primary not worth using is the lock and load, having the same problems as the black box but ramped up to 11. It has a faster projectile speed, which is a $200 upgrade on any other launcher, and it has damage to buildings, which is akin to a $500 upgrade to any other launcher. So I think the best way to handle this thing would be to turn it into more of a specialty weapon that's very good at one specific thing. And I think the most thematic niche we could give it is tank busting, because after all, tanks are basically just portable buildings if you think about it. The upgrade for this, which I'm creatively calling Tank Buster, is a 50% damage bonus against tanks that also multiplies with the universal damage upgrade. This would let it deal a whopping 450 damage per shot against tanks with everything maxed out, or 1,350 damage on a crit. That sounds incredibly broken, but do keep in mind that on top of being down a pipe to start with, the grenade launcher is the most expensive weapon in the game to upgrade. At the point you can actually deal that much damage to a tank, you could have just as easily maxed out the Flog or Wrangled Sentry, which would be slightly worse at the job, but would have much less opportunity cost. But yeah, with how comparatively few things are actually good at busting tanks as it is, I really wouldn't mind if something this expensive to upgrade could do it efficiently. Bad demo weapon number 2 is the Quickie Bomb launcher, which unfortunately has the worst possible stat spread for a mode like MvM. In general, Demo wants to spam a ton of stickies that do a lot of damage each, so the weapon that has penalties in both of those things is not really an appealing choice. What I don't think we should do with the Quickie Bomb is give it upgrades that try to bridge the gap in those two stats, because if we did that, it would always be playing a game of catch-up with the other two launchers and never be quite as good. I think the best direction to take it is to lean into what makes it good in PvP, fully charging stickies. And for that, really all we would have to do is a plus 30% charge speed upgrade. At max stacks, this would make fully charging stickies nearly instantaneous, turning Demo into a solid long-range threat that's focused on sticky sniping instead of setting up traps. This is definitely another change prioritizing fun over usefulness, but trying to outdo the literal best weapon in the entire game mode at its own game is a fool's errand that I would frankly rather not run. Ultimately, even if they're suboptimal, I think creating new ways to play the class would be better for the game mode overall. Okay, that's enough of explosive demo, now let's talk about what most people were waiting for, Demo Knight. The thing is, I don't actually think Demo Knight is that bad in current MvM. He does really need some upgrades to help him put in work, but once you've got some momentum, I don't think he's unusable by any means. Again, he may not be the optimal choice for any specific role, but he is effective enough that I don't think having one on your team is a complete throw pick. So realistically, I think Demo Knight can be taken care of in only a couple upgrades. The first of which is to fix the problem that I just mentioned, which again is that you have to dump a ton of credits into him before he's even usable. You're pretty much forced to max out resistances before you get anything else to not instantly die. So I think some kind of survivability upgrade that makes Demo Knight less reliant on resistances would be appreciated. The upgrade that I'll opt for is this one, defensive buff on hit as a way to make you much better in the early game. Basically, hitting enemies would give you a 35% damage resistance and immunity to crits. This bypasses a lot of very expensive upgrades you're otherwise required to have to make Demo Knight work, letting you get the ball rolling with only 700 credits instead of a couple thousand. But even in the later game when you can afford the resistance upgrades, this buff would still compound with them, giving even more survivability, which in my opinion Demo Knight still desperately needs. Overall, I think this is the best way to make Demo Knight better at every stage in the game without making him too broken. The second change that I'll give though is one to level the playing field between the good melees and the bad, because right now there are quite a few that don't really do too much for you. Notably, the two that focus on gaining charge on kill are obsoleted by upgrades, since on on top of being able to buy charge-recharge speed outright, you could also just buy movement speed and never have to charge in the first place. So for the Claymore and Persian Persuader, I like the idea of plus 100% damage while charging to make your charges actually mean something. This would make your melee hit while charging do up to 650 damage on a crit, letting you pinball between enemies a lot more effectively. But on top of that, it would also increase your shield bash damage. And considering we also gave the Splendid Screen the damage upgrade, it can now do up to 850 damage with a shield bash at max range. Ideally, this would also fix the power disparity between it and the Tide Turner, because right now there isn't really much reason to use the former. But yeah, even if they wouldn't make a meta, I think that these two upgrades are all Demo Knight would really need to stay relevant through the entire game. And last but only probably least, let's talk about the Caber. It ain't good. Let's fix that. With how gimmicky this thing is designed to be at its core, I really don't think we could do much with serious utility here, but we can at least make it really fun to use, which in my opinion is a good alternative. So behold this upgrade, Explosive Expert. With it, not only does the Caber's explosion turn into a tactical nuke that deals 600 damage, but it also recharges increasingly fast with each tick. I really don't have much to say about this one, other than that Caber Knights charging into a group of robots and dealing several thousand damage with a crit swing would be amazing, and I am sad that's not in TF2 already.
Heavy weapons guy.
Is actually pretty good on the secondary and melee front, but definitely has a clear winner when it comes to miniguns. There's the Brass Beast, which does 20% more damage, and the other ones, which do not do 20% more damage. In a game mode this centralized around dealing damage, that's really not a hard equation to solve. And that's honestly a shame, because the miniguns are all super unique and have way more potential than what they're being given. Just kidding, they're all the fucking same, but that doesn't mean we can't get a bit creative with them. So for the arguably worst miniguns, the Tomislav Natasha and Huolong Heater, I think giving each one a unique specialist upgrade that really changes how it plays would be the best move here. Frankly, even if it's not up there with the Brass Beast and the tippy top of the meta, anything that gets heavy out of monotony hell would be appreciated. Right then, let's start with the Natasha. The Natasha is very obviously geared to be a support-oriented minigun, but by default the support that it offers is mostly a write-off. You have to be right up in the enemy's face for the effect to last any time at all, and since the slowdown is absolute instead of being 8% of the enemy's base speed, a lot of bigger robots just won't be slowed at all. In my professional opinion, that is uncool, so to remedy that, we've got Slowdown Specialist. This upgrade makes the Natasha's debuff a bit stronger and apply at max power regardless of range, which would be fantastic for countering super scouts that have gotten past your defenses. But on top of that, debuffed robots will also have a much slower turning and firing speed similar to Oil Leak. This makes robots slow in basically every way they possibly can be, allowing for your team to follow up on them much more easily. Now again, this does have some overlap with other upgrades that I've added for other weapons, but on top of the Natasha, combining them into a convenient package, they can also stack with those other upgrades too, which could potentially make for some insane weapon synergies. The Huolong is up next, and this one has a pretty natural solution in my opinion. If you already have a Pyro on your team, the bonus damage to burning enemies actually makes this pretty good. But if you're bothering to set up that specific synergy in the first place, I do think that it should be a little bit better at its job than the Brass Beast is just by default. So for that, I will propose Fire Specialist. This one is simple. Your bullets deal mini crits to burning enemies, and the fire ring does triple damage. This actually puts it pretty on par with the Brass Beast in terms of damage. It's a lot better in the early waves, but averages out a lot more as the game progresses once mini crits become more abundant. Overall, this should make it a very competitive side grade for damage if you're willing to coordinate with your team. And finally, there's the Tomislav, which comes with the benefit of slightly better accuracy for more mid-range damage, which is still beaten out by the raw damage of everything else. This would not be the case though with the Accuracy Specialist upgrade, which would make it more accurate, much less affected by damage falloff, and also immune to the normal damage and accuracy penalties that apply for the first second after you rev. This would make the Tomislav a choice pick on more open maps like Big Rock, but also during waves with dangerous close-up enemies that you don't really want to get near. This gives you much more flexibility with your positioning in exchange for less maximum damage in optimal circumstances. Overall a fair trade-off in my opinion. And there we go, a trifecta of specialist upgrades that would hopefully make Heavy's loadout choice a lot more interesting even if the balancing would need a bit of testing. Heavy is one of my lesser played classes, ironically mainly due to the fact that he's a complete snoozer. So if you've got some experience with him in MvM, any feedback would definitely be appreciated. With the new all-class upgrades, Engineer is actually in a pretty good state in MvM, with basically all of his remaining options having a pretty solid use case. However, while his primaries and secondaries are settled, his wrench situation still leaves a bit to be desired. The Jag is pretty clearly the best option, with the stock and now the Southern Hospitality following closely behind. The Eureka Effect and Gunslinger, though, basically have no reason to ever be used, because the things they offer you in vanilla TF2 don't translate very well to MvM. So, first of all, let's talk about the Eureka Effect. Being able to teleport to your spawn on command can actually be a very useful feature. which is why Engineer has 2 much better ways to do it that can be used with any wrench you want. Teleport to spawn canteens are extremely cheap and basically the same thing but better, activating instantly and also giving you back all of your health and metal, which is something the Eureka Effect ability doesn't actually do. And even if you don't want to waste your canteen slot but really need to get back to spawn quickly, you're probably going to have a 2-way teleporter set up that takes you there anyway. And even the cheaper teleporter upside is completely pointless, since in between waves you can just instantly build a level 3 teleporter for free. So I think the best way to bring the Eureka Effect back into the spotlight is through an upgrade called Teleport Specialist. This basically turns the Eureka Effect's reload ability into an infinite use teleport the spawn canteen, activating significantly faster in both directions and also resupplying you when you teleport to your spawn. In addition, this would also make your teleporter recharge 35% faster and be less likely to be targeted by bots. This would make the Eureka Effect the best wrench for both keeping your metal topped off and guaranteeing your team can access the front lines, both of which can be incredibly useful in a lot of harder maps. This is still a pretty niche utility that you're not going to need every single time, but at the end of the day, the Eureka Effect itself is a pretty niche design, so I think it works out pretty well. The Gunslinger's problem is also pretty apparent. Only being able to 3-hit crit instead of having random crits makes dealing with spies a lot more challenging. So to fix that, I'll propose the upgrade Random Mini Crits, which would allow the Gunslinger— nah, I'm just kidding. Obviously, mini sentries are downright terrible compared to a full level 3. In vanilla, this is offset by minis being more spammable, but in MVM, you can just buy an upgrade canteen and that niche is filled no matter what wrench you're using. But I do think that a sort of quantity over quality wrench is actually a pretty interesting design that the Gunslinger can lean into more. Even though it's definitely a meme play style, using the Gunslinger with a disposable mini is actually pretty fun as it is. So why not give it something like this, the +1 Max Sentry upgrade? It does what's on the tin. Each tick lets you have an additional mini sentry on the field at a time. Even if the damage is only on par with a level 3 at max upgrades, it does open up some very interesting strategies. Need damage on the front lines, but super scouts keep getting through? Well, just dedicate 2 of your minis to backline cleanup while leaving the other 3 as frontline DPS. Playing a map where robots can come from 2 different routes? This would allow you to effectively split up your DPS. I really don't know how powerful this would be. I could definitely see it becoming broken, but I could also see it just becoming a gimmick. Either way though, this would create a very fun alternative playstyle for Engineer without removing his support tools like the dispenser, which overall I think would be a huge benefit to the class. Medic forces us to answer the hardest question in the entirety of TF2. How do you get people to willingly switch off the Uber Saw? Free Uber on hit that also works on defenseless robots like Sentry Busters is crazy. We've got to pull out all the stops to make the other melees compete. We already gave the stock Bone Saw Oil Leak, which admittedly isn't quite as good as getting Uber, but does at least provide niche utility if your team really needs it. But a weapon like the Amputator is a bit harder to solve. Health Regen is already a buyable upgrade, so its only appeal is the radial healing you get from taunting. This is already a pretty niche ability in PvP, but especially in MvM, you are not going to have time to sit there taunting while actively under fire from like a billion robots. However, I actually don't hate the idea of radial healing in general, since it could be a pretty easy way to keep the rest of your teammates topped off, assuming you could do it while also pocketing your main damage dealer. So I'll suggest the +5 second melody duration upgrade as a way to let it do just that. Each tick you have would cause the healing aura to last for 5 additional seconds, pretty easy. But that does mean that yes, the total duration would be longer than the taunt itself, letting you be fully actionable while still passively healing your team. In all honesty, I'm really not sure if this would be any more than just a convenience, but I can see the value in keeping your teammates' health topped off without having to stop healing your Uber target. Finally though, let's talk about the real heavy hitter upgrade that I want to give to Medic's worst melees, the Solemn Vow and the Vitasaw. The Solemn Vow lets you see enemy health. Every single class can already do that in MvM. It's a core feature of the game mode. What the fuck is the point of this thing? And the Vitasaw lets you hold on to Uber you'll be building incredibly quickly instead of gaining it outright. It's slightly better than useless, but never better than the Uber Saw or anywhere close. So yeah, these weapons obviously need a lot of love. The idea that I have for them though is an upgrade that I think could potentially bring them up to the forefront of Medic's kit. This upgrade is what I'm calling Uber Efficiency, a single tick upgrade that would let you prematurely end your active Uber charge and preserve the rest of the meter. Only need 40% of your crits to kill the giant medic? Just right click and you've got 60% left in the tank for the next one. This would allow extremely powerful micromanagement to get the most out of every Uber, which honestly I could see becoming incredibly broken. I don't think it would be too bad because most of Medic's charging is through canteens and you can't do the same thing with those. But even though the experienced MvM medics that I showed this to loved it, feedback is still definitely appreciated with this one. I wouldn't mind if we had to make it more expensive or add a flat Uber penalty each time you cancel your charge, or even make it cost one of the Vitasaw's organs and do something else with a Solemn Vow entirely. But with how much Uber the Uber Saw can already build from scratch, I really don't know if letting you preserve the Uber you've already built would be comparatively that much more powerful. The Uber Saw gives you more uptime outright, while this would let you min-max the uptime you already have. Overall, I think it would be a very workable mechanic. Sniper is already in pretty good shape from the universal changes, so this will be quick and easy. Well, mostly anyway, because unfortunately there is basically zero reason to ever use a rifle that isn't the Hitman's Heatmaker. Because of the way that the focus meter is programmed, it gives the Hitman's a huge DPS boost that not a single other rifle can get. And personally, I think a single rifle being that over-centralizing is kinda lame. So while it's not really a new upgrade, I do think that having maxed out reload speed should also have the hidden stat of letting every rifle stay scoped while reloading. This would allow them to start charging immediately, but also mitigate the headshot delay, two things that make the Heatmaker completely dominant. Does this make the Heatmaker feel less special? I mean, kinda, although due to how focus works, it would still increase your DPS a little bit, so I still think it would have a solid niche. But if we don't do this, I really don't think there's any other way to make the other sniper rifles compete. So that evens the playing field a ton, but there are still two rifles I think would fall behind, the Sydney Sleeper and the Classic. The Sydney Sleeper, well, can't headshot, so you're missing out on a ton of single target damage by using it. Thankfully, but also weirdly, it still can get the explosive headshots upgrade, so it's not completely useless. But marking one enemy for death at a time is something that a lot of other classes can already do, and losing critical headshots for that is not even close to worth it. But in this case, I do think that's an easy fix. First of all, we let the Sydney Sleeper's flavor of explosive headshots apply Girardi to the enemies caught in the explosion. This would let you mark a ton of enemies at a time, and I really don't know why this wasn't the case by default. But second, we also poured over the Girardi's minus 35% speed on target upgrade to the Sydney Sleeper too. And just to make it a bit more reliable, we'll also give this upgrade the hidden stat where every hit you do on enemies applies at least 4 seconds of Girardi regardless of whether you're scoped. This would turn the Sydney Sleeper into a fantastic AoE debuffer weapon that could slow and mark large groups of enemies from long range. That's still a fairly niche role to fill, but it is a quick and easy way of making it much better at the job it's already supposed to do. Overall, I think it's a good solution. The Classic has a similar problem, not being able to headshot at all unless you fully charge it. This completely tanks your AoE damage, since typically you want to headshot as many robots as possible to get the most amount of explosions. However, even though that's the current dominant playstyle, I do think there is potential in a rifle more centered around slower but higher damage shots. You just gotta give fully charged shots a tangible bonus to make them worth going for. For that, I'll propose the Armor Perforation upgrade, which would let fully charged shots deal 100% more damage per tick, as well as piercing enemy resistances. This would let fully charged Classic headshots do 2700 damage at max upgrades, making them an invaluable giant killing tool at the expense of less frequent AoE. But on top of the Classic doing this, I also think the Machina could also have access to this upgrade too, since its entire design is also based around fully charging shots. Considering the Machina is way more useful though, I think that it should only get a single tick of the upgrade instead of 2. Compared to the Classic's maximum 2700 damage, this would allow the Machina to do a max of 2070 damage with its native damage bonus. These are both pretty high numbers, so if they do need tweaking a little bit then so be it, but I do think this is the best way to let charge-focused rifles serve a unique role in MvM. The last weapons I want to touch up for Sniper are the bows, because even though they've gotten a buff from Oil Leak, I still think they would end up being pretty bad. And really, the only thing you have to do is just let them have explosive headshots. I really don't know why they were left out of this pool to begin with. I can't imagine the Huntsman doing the same thing Sniper can already do, but slower being too broken. So last up is the Spy, who infamously is the worst class in the entirety of MvM bar none. The only thing that he really has going for him is being good at killing giants, but that's something most classes can already do at least reasonably well on top of being good at a lot of other things too. And his most unique tool, the Sapper, is fine for stalling large groups I guess, but for the same upgrade cost, a Soldier, Pyro, Demo, or Sniper could delete those groups entirely. And on top of all of that, the biggest middle finger that Spy gets is that for some reason, bots are programmed to prioritize targeting spies above every other class. His disguises do let him bypass that a little bit, but the second he gets a stab, he is pretty much toast. Now here's the deal. I don't really mind Spy being more of a specialist class. I don't think there's anything wrong with a class that's not good at everything all the time. But the caveat there is that you should at the very least be consistently good at the thing you specialize in. Right now, there's basically a 50-50 chance that Spy just instantly dies after he gets a single stab. So after a lot of brainstorming, I think that I've come up with a solid set of upgrades that would really bring Spy into his own in MvM, both by making him more consistent at his current job and letting him specialize in more roles that come up more frequently. The first of which is probably the most impactful, and it's one that I've seen people asking for ages that I generally agree with. And that is a class upgrade that makes Spy an alternative to Scout for collecting money. With how essential of a role money collecting is in MvM, I've never really liked that only a single class can reliably do it. And if we wanted to make a second one, I think Spy does make the most sense. Even though his mobility isn't stellar, he does have a lot of options for keeping himself alive and generally does prefer to play close to the action anyway. So sure, let's take the path of least resistance and give Spy the option to be a money collector. here. I think a basic plus 50% collection range upgrade will suffice here, letting Spy scale up the Scout's money collection range at max ticks while also getting a fair amount of overheal from collecting cash. I do think his overheal gain should be a little bit lower than Scout's considering his better survivability tools. We could give him 5 health per money pile per tick of the upgrade you have compared to Scout's flat 25 health. But yeah, on top of giving Spy more ways to play, which again he desperately needs, this would help his survivability tremendously. Even if you want to play a more backstab focused playstyle instead of dedicating yourself to collecting money, just having that passive health regeneration would be huge. Again, I know this isn't the most original upgrade that's ever been proposed, but I really do think this would be a fantastic easy way to make the class as a whole more viable. With the big one out of the way, let's take a look at Spy's weapon situation, because he is one of the biggest victims of meta syndrome in the entire game. And while this is the case in basically all of his slots, I think the biggest offender to this is the Dead Ringer, being infinitely better than cloaking in basically every single way. Unlike in PvP, robots will ignore disguised players entirely, so you never have to rely on invis for positioning. And when the bots do end up shooting at you, the Dead Ringer is infinitely better for getting them off your back. You get a ton of damage resistance, a speed boost, and bots will stop targeting you immediately compared to cloak watches where that is nowhere near the case. I am dead serious when I say that not using the Dead Ringer is shooting yourself in the foot for no good reason. But even though that's the current status quo, I think that stealth as a concept is still something the watches can specialize in pretty easily. If you remember, Spy does have the pretty big problem where robots are guaranteed to prioritize you if they see you. That's not a big deal if you have the Dead Ringer because you can just pop it and run away, but if you have the invis watches, this leaves you basically screwed. So what if we let the invis watch and cloak and dagger solve that exact problem? This is Stealth Specialist, the other upgrade for Spy that I think would go a long way into defining his gameplay. This upgrade would modify robots' targeting priority to make them a lot less likely to target the Spy. Now, there are a lot of complicated mechanics that go into this that I won't get into here, but basically, by default, if there are any other teammates within a robot's line of sight, the robots will always target that teammate over the Spy even when he's undisguised. Additionally, unlike normally, where a successful backstab immediately draws the aggro of every nearby robot, this upgrade would cause that attack to register on the same priority level as any other class. This would make Spy's choice of watch an actually interesting one. Do you want your gameplay to be more consistent overall in exchange for not having a safety net when you're caught? Or do you want to guarantee that you're caught more often but be able to get out of jail for free every time you are? Even if the exact mechanics would have to be tweaked a bit because again, robot behavior is a bit complicated, I do really like the idea of Spy having a mechanic like this that you can't use at the same time as the Dead Ringer. So yeah, if you're one of those poor souls that plays Spy on MvM for some reason, I would love to know what you think of this one. The final big changes I want to make to Spy are to his sappers, mainly as a way to help him stand apart from one another, but also as a way to make him less useless overall. Right now, both the sapper and red tape recorder are completely identical, disabling groups of robots and slowing down giants while also guaranteeing any melee hit you land on smaller bots as a backstab. In rare circumstances, this can be a very useful tool, but usually it's just convenient and not much else. And that's honestly kind of a shame, because the Electro Sapper, being the only item in TF2 that's designed to destroy electronics, really should be good or at least an interesting item in a mode like MvM where all of your enemies are robots. So let's give each sapper a unique upgrade that really makes it a standout item in Spy's kit. For the stock sapper, the upgrade is simple, plus 20 sapper health drain. This allows the sapper to drain 60 health per second at max ticks, which is enough to kill every small robot in the game with max sapper power. This makes the sapper a very effective group damage tool. Just slap it onto a horde of smaller bots so your teammates can focus on the giants. But speaking of giants, 60 damage per second really does not do too much to them, so I think we should also add an additional 1% max health drain for every tick you have. This means a maxed out sapper could drain 24% of a giant's max health, which would be very powerful, especially against a lot of tankier giants. The only real problem that percent-based health drain would cause is against boss robots. They're entirely balanced around the fact that they have a lot of HP, and the sapper being able to deal 15,000 damage within 8 seconds would be insane. So just to make sure it doesn't completely break the game, health drain against boss robots will be capped at 1% per second. That's still really good, but it's only about on par with how much damage Spy's doing to bosses anyway. For the red tape recorder though, I want to go the opposite direction and make it good against something that Spy currently sucks at: tanks. The only real support tools that exist for tanks are stuff like the Crits Krieg and Buff Banner. Tanks are normally completely immune to debuffs, but out of all the weapons in the game, I think the red tape recorder should be the exception to this. And I think the deconstruction upgrade would be a great way to do it. Again, the concept is straightforward. You can now put your sapper on tanks, which would make them move 15% slower and take 20% more damage while they're being sapped. I do want to fudge the numbers a little bit though and make the sapper last double the amount of time on tanks. Partially to add opportunity cost because you can't use your sapper in the meantime, but mainly because I think Spy should be able to put the sapper on the tank and forget. It would kind of defeat the purpose if he had to constantly be on the tank reapplying the buff instead of being able to do other things in the meantime. But yeah, I think splitting utility to make sapper choice more interesting would be a very good way to give Spy more specialist roles without allowing him to do too much at once. And finally, with the stock revolver and enforcer already being covered, we have the last revolver that still sucks, the ambassador. If you really want to deal damage, well, just use your knife. It does way more damage than your gun ever will. But also the diamondback is a way better option weapon, getting basically unlimited crits as you stab smaller robots and there's no cooldown between them. So to keep things simple, let's give the Ambassador its own version of armor perforation, because I do like the bonuses that one provides. This would let its headshots hit like a truck, dealing up to 3x damage and piercing resistances. And just for convenience, I also want to add the hidden stat that removes crit fall off so you can snipe robots from long range if you really want to. So anyway, that is my attempt at trying to fix MvM's worst weapons using the upgrade station. Like I said in the beginning, this is very much a hypothetical video because there's a lot that would need tested before I could commit to these being in TF2. And also, again, these are meant to be added alongside of other balance changes too to make the game mode not just way too easy. But overall, even if they're not perfect, I do really like the idea that a lot of these bring to the table. That said, feedback on any of my upgrades is definitely appreciated. Even though it is a goofy video, I do like to refine my concepts as much as I possibly can, and who knows, maybe Valve will add these to TF2 someday. Nah, who am I kidding? We're getting Einsteinium bot killers before we get anything meaningful. And also, thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring the video. It does help keep the lights on. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like. If you hated this video, you're probably the human equivalent to a rocket jumper with maxed out damage upgrades, and most importantly, have a good one.